Well, hello everybody. How's it going? I'm attorney Michael Ehline. I hope you guys are having a happy Sunday. Hold on one second. I'm still trying to get squared away. I know I started the show a little bit late today, but I'm just still trying to get everything figured out. I'm going in landscape mode. So, we're going to talk today a little bit about cryptocurrency and what's going on in the cryptocurrency world. But before I do that, I need to find a couple of items. So, let me just tell you who I am. I am attorney Michael Ehline. I am a natural law attorney. I primarily earn revenue from doing personal injury law, but I have a background in appellate law, and I actually externed for the California Court of Appeal when I was an up and coming becoming an attorney. And I've got about 20 years experience, and more and more often in the last few years, I've gotten more involved in decentralized currency because of my background also as a libertarian and someone who believes in the Constitution as opposed to federalism. So hopefully I've got good comms. Let me know 100% if I've got decent comms, no background issues. Give me some 5x5s if there's any problems. Been having a couple of issues with that the last few shows. Want to make sure that everything's squared away for you guys. So, yeah, I've been practicing law for about 20 years, and I've done criminal defense. I worked for the prosecutor's office. I won about $300 million for personal injury victims. But my love is the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and of course, above all else, natural law, because that's where our rights flow from. Flow from. And okay, good, right on 100%. So what I see happening, good, that's good, 100%. What I see happening in the last, I don't know, well, forever, ever since 1913, before we were born, the private Federal Reserve banking system and quasi-governmental organizations engaged in overreach in violation of what I consider to be the Constitution, in violation of our natural law rights that were granted to us by our Creator. If you read the Declaration of Independence, it makes clear that our rights don't come from the state, contrary to what they want you to learn in the public schools, government-run schools, is our rights come from our Creator. And of course, we know they hate that because the National Education Association and most teachers' unions are far left Marxist organizations. In fact, the NEA is in the process of involving themselves in a partnership with the World Economic Forum, the enemy of freedom. You will own nothing and be happy. They don't believe in property rights. Basically, it's right out of the Marxist playbook. Pretty much everything they support, you could read directly out of the Communist Manifesto, a Communist Manifesto. And it's basically verbatim what they want for you. And so in addition to being a natural law advocate, I am also a homeschooler, and I work with Brett Pike over at Classical Learner to help teachers get their kids out of the public school system and into a system where they can learn critical thinking, logical fallacies, proper debating tactics when dealing with these Marxist apologists that we call federalists. So in the past, you've heard me describe Democrat versus Republican, but I will go ahead and upgrade and update what I mean by that. So it's really a battle of federalists versus anti-federalists. And so myself, Thomas Jefferson, and most of our founding fathers were anti-federalists. They believed, and I do believe, that we need decentralized control of our lives. Marxism, on the other hand, is more aligned with federalism, where the government ultimately controls the means of production and directs everything from a distant place like Washington, D.C. And so one of the things that most of our founding fathers were against was a centralized currency system. They didn't believe in national banks. They believed that they didn't like banks. They didn't like bankers. They definitely didn't like interest rates, which were barred under the original English law. But bankers pay off politicians, and politicians pass laws. And so this show today, the first thing that I'm going to cover is, I'm going to show you a video from the 10th Amendment Center from one of my friends over there, but I just want to really quickly cover what we're going to talk about today. So We're going to talk about cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. And they've disrupted these so-called traditional financial legal frameworks, and they present novel legal challenges for government regulators, courts, and legal practitioners. So here I'm going to explore the landscape of cryptocurrency law in the United States, and I'm going to focus on securities regulation, anti-money laundering compliance, and jurisdictional issues in decentralized systems. And I'm going to analyze cases like SEC versus Ripple Labs. Hold on a minute. Let me fix this, guys. I am a lawyer, so I want to make sure this looks squared away. There we go. All right. SEC versus Ripple Labs, SEC versus Coinbase, and United States versus Harman. And so this article is going to attempt to elucidate how courts are applying legal doctrines to digital assets. All right. And I designed this for law students because I was invited to speak on a panel. So I'm going to share with you my rough outline, which is still under construction. Now, nothing that I share with you should be construed as financial or legal advice, okay? This is just how I would approach this, being a licensed attorney or a member of the bar, strike that, a member of the bar in California and Texas, how I would apply these legal principles and how I would interpret them as a lawyer of over 20 years in practice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the foundational understanding of crypto law, and I'm going to highlight case law, and I'm going to discuss the implications of regulatory shifts under the Trump administration. But before I do that, I'm going to get into a little bit of what's been going on out there, because it's pretty scary, really. And this is why I don't support government, quasi-private, quasi-public organizations, because they always lean towards federalism, more control over your life. Government employees typically are far left, and they're that way for a reason, because leftists stay in power by making sure that government employees get grandiose paychecks, grandiose salaries, additional rights that you and I don't have through their unions, unlike people who are entrepreneurs, which my background is an entrepreneur in construction and sales. So I'm able to look at it from outside academia. And so I'm going to try to explain things to you in layman's terms as well. Good seeing you, AgeGo. So if you were brainwashed in a government-run school, it'll be hard for you to track with a lot of things that I'm saying. But government pensions, bloated paychecks, that's what the federalists want. And so they'll typically vote for the far left because that makes sure that they get bigger salaries in exchange for their votes. So I would say, based on my experience, about 80 to 90% of government employees vote hard left. And they do that probably because, like Adam Smith said in his book, Wealth of Nations, people tend to support things that will support them. Self-interest and self-preservation is what men and women are seeking. And it's although it's selfish, that's why I prefer laissez-faire capitalism, because at least in a true capitalist system, you can form relationships with other people and develop parallel systems outside of government and not be a leech off of the taxpayer. So what's ended up happening is we now have a two-party system where one party, many of them, the more entrepreneurial types, support less government, and the concept of less government means more freedom. And then the other half, primarily government employees and people who work for the state, want more government and less freedom and more control over your children, a la the National Education Association and the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization agenda, which, pushing the trans agenda, pushing sexualization of kindergartners, taking away children from their parents if they don't go along with what the public schools want. And so me being a libertarian, I'm able to dissect both of the political parties. And I've realized that it's basically a single party system. But there are more libertarian leaning minded people on the right than there are on the left, unfortunately. And it didn't used to be that way. And I can tell you that from personal experiences, being a recovering Democrat and now a libertarian. So before we get into the cryptocurrency laws and understanding what's going on with cryptocurrency, first we're gonna go back a little bit into what's going on with the Trump administration, because this is kind of important. What we have right now is we have a situation where where this quasi-government agency, the Federal Reserve, is run by people who are federalists, and they don't want to lose control, and they're in partnership with private banking cartels. Okay, that's bottom line. And I'm going to get into the history of how that happened in a minute with the John Bolton or Michael Bolton video that we're going to share from the 10th Amendment Center. But what you really need to understand is that Chairman Powell of the secret Federal Reserve, where they have 9 people who meet in secret to decide what interest rates are going to be, and they use outdated Keynesian economics and academic principles from what I consider to be the Marxist-run academic system to basically control your and my life by manipulating what we call fiat currency. They print money, worthless paper, out of nothing, assign it value, and then loan it to you, and they charge you interest on it, which is exactly what Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson never wanted for this country. So just so you know that most of our founding fathers did not support this, and they did not believe in having national debt. National debt is a bad thing. Of course it is. Personal debt is a bad thing as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what Donald Trump has been trying to do. So Donald Trump has been a victim and also an abuser of this fiat currency system. But he's wised up over the years, probably because he's been more of a victim than somebody who's been a beneficiary of it. And he's trying to weaken U.S. currency so we can abolish the Federal Reserve Bank and the IRS and return us back to a tariff-based economy, which is when we were the most prosperous nation on earth until the creation of Jekyll Island. And then I think it was Bretton Woods after World War II. Americans had economic freedom. I mean, you could, and we're going to get into that in a little while. But we know that under the Biden administration, inflation rates were at over 9%. But the Federal Reserve gave Joe Biden 2 rate cuts. So as a lawyer, obviously what I'm going to do is use the rules of evidence. So reasonable inferences can be drawn from circumstantial evidence that the Federal Reserve Bank and the government system does not support Donald Trump. They don't like him because they know that he's trying to get rid of taxpayers being forced to pay for bloated government pensions, organizations that lose money like the U.S. Post Office and Amtrak. So there's a real battle between Trump and all of these federalists. And so Trump has taken a hard anti-federalist approach. And so if the Federal Reserve Bank was to lower interest rates, that would inject liquidity into the economy, and the economy would be booming. And we're bringing in billions of dollars now in tariff money. Now, there's always going to be short-term pain when you try to change the fiat currency system, but we already see gold going through the roof, and we see people going to decentralized currency like cryptocurrency because they don't trust the dollar. And so the Federal Reserve Bank is trying to make it appear that the dollar is still strong. And I think most of us know the dollar is not strong. The BRICS economic systems like China, India, and Russia are creating what our founding fathers wanted for our country, and actually what our Constitution requires, which is currency backed by something of intrinsic value, not a promise from a private banking system or from our politicians. I mean, does anybody trust politicians? So as a result of that, what we have is a battle between the statists or the federalists and the anti-federalists. And Powell is a statist. And so here is one of Powell's, for lack of a better word, employees being interviewed undercover without him knowing. And this is what he is saying about what Powell is trying to do to prevent Donald Trump from being successful. So let's just use the rules of evidence so you can understand what's really happening here. This is pretty amazing. Let's check it out.
Trump is a crazy person. It's very clear. I mean, he's a dumb guy.
Does he hate Trump? Is the feeling neutral?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
He wants to be remembered in history as somebody who held the line against like Trump and like somebody who like helped the economy.
Yeah.
And Trump was president. He wanted to stimulate the economy.
Right.
But he wouldn't do it. And he started raising interest rates, doing the opposite that Trump wanted. So I mean, so the feeling is this, that like we don't want Trump to be in government.
Right.
Trump is a crazy person. It's very clear. I mean, he's a dumb guy.
Does he hate Trump? Is the feeling neutral?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
He wants to be remembered in history As somebody who held the line against like Trump and like somebody who like helped the economy.
Yeah.
And Trump was president, he wanted to stimulate the economy.
Right.
But he wouldn't do it. And he started raising interest rates, doing the opposite that Trump wanted. So, I mean, so the feeling is this, that like, we don't want Trump to be in government.
Right.
So basically, there you go. You've got a quasi-government employee, somebody who works for the Federal Reserve Bank, who works for Chairman Powell, saying that he doesn't want Donald Trump to be successful because obviously they think he's dumb and they want him out of government because Trump is not a traditional academic, somebody who was brainwashed in the Marxist-run education system. So as a result, they do not want this guy to have any kind of political gravitas or power, and they want to make him look bad. And that's the bottom line. That's what they want, and that's what they're trying to achieve. And we know that the left controls most of the news media, so that's the narrative that they pushed. And we know public school teachers hate Trump, of course. And National Public Radio, which is run by Democrats, they hate Trump. So obviously, all of the press is going to be negative. We know now that Hillary Clinton made up this false Russiagate story to try to say that Trump was a Russian agent. And then they're trying to conflate it with, well, Russia interfered with our election. Well, Russia's interfered with all of our elections, but he was never a Russian agent. That was a story made up by Hillary Clinton and pushed by Barack Obama when he was leaving office. And of course, we know that most government employees, like I said, the CIA, the FBI, hard leftists. They don't like Trump. They know that he's going to try to reduce their salaries. They know that he's going to try to eliminate government jobs, like all those 80,000 IRS agents that the Democrats put into power so they can audit you and come after your money. And so they don't like him because that takes away from the power base of the Democrat Party. Remember, the Democrats get an enormous amount of money from these government unions. All those union dues go to help support Democrat candidates, which I would just prefer to call Federalists. So let's learn a little bit about the history of how this whole thing got started. And then you can sort of understand why anti-Federalists like me don't like people like Jerome Powell. And let's just listen.
Why is it that they try to smear the legacy of any and every leader who dares to take on the banks? Take Andrew Jackson, who openly declared he would take out the banks or the banks would take out him. And they tried to shoot him, but they missed. But old Hickory didn't, and he not only canceled the charter of the Second Bank of the United States, but he mandated that new land be bought in silver or gold. And he became the only president in US history to fully pay off the national debt. But all schools teach about him is the Trail of Tears. And if you look into his policies, it always says something like, yeah, the debt was zero, but it precipitated one of the worst financial crises in American history, which it did. It led to a 4-year depression. But here's what they don't tell you. By 1841, the price of real estate had dropped 88%. Just imagine if you could get housing for 88% cheaper. Speculators and banks were wiped out, but for average people, this was an opportunity to buy land at affordable prices. Land was far cheaper. Jackson hated concentrated financial power. His policies wiped out speculators and Eastern elites, but cleared the way for ordinary people to settle west, and in the long run empowered ordinary people. It was short-term pain for long-term populist gain. And this is what we mean by end the Fed. It's why I write books on the history of banking, fake news, how information is controlled, our rights, how money corrupts systems. We just released a new audiobook on the life of Andrew Jackson. ClassicalLearner.com.
So that's my friend Brett Pike, and I want to give him a shout out because I think that he is just one of the most enlightened visionaries that I've ever met in modern times. I think he's a really amazing guy. So now let me explain how this works. In order for the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, we'd have to have something come in that shows the dollar is getting weaker, like lower employment. Well, it turns out that a Biden appointee, an economist who still maintained a job with the Trump administration, was fudging job numbers to make it look like there was higher employment than there is. And of course, what that did is it enabled Chairman Powell to not lower interest rates, which absolutely hurts cryptocurrency in Trump's vision to help get people invested into, to make cryptocurrency less volatile, to make it more attractive to invest in, so we can get off the dollar and get back into gold, silver, and now cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, which makes financial transactions faster and enables you to have what's called the store of value, where you don't have to use banks. You could literally abolish the entire banking system if you had a cryptocurrency system in place. And of course, the Federalists don't like this. So it's an age-old battle, which we're going to get into. But what happened is Trump was informed that our country's jobs numbers are being produced by a Biden appointee named Dr. Erica Muckentarfer, the Commissioner of Labor Statistics, who faked the jobs numbers before the election to try and boost Kamala's chances of victory. This is the same Bureau of Labor Statistics that overstated jobs growth in March 2024 by approximately 818,000, and then again right before the 2024 presidential election in August and September by 112,000. These were records. No one can be that wrong, right? We need accurate job numbers. I have directed my team to fire this Biden political appointee immediately. She will be replaced with someone much more competent and qualified. Important numbers like this must be fair and accurate. They can't be manipulated for political purposes. Muckentarfer said that there were only 73,000 jobs added, a shock, but more importantly, that a major mistake was made by them. 258,000 jobs downward in the prior 2 months. Similar things happened in the first part of the year, always to the negative. The economy is booming under Trump, despite a Fed that also plays games, this time with interest rates, where they lowered them twice and substantially just before the presidential election, I assume, in hopes of getting Kamala elected. How did that work out? Jerome Too Late Powell should also be put out to pasture. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And so I'll just show you a little illustration here. So in September 18th of 2024, Powell cut the rates by 0.50 percentage points to 4.75%. And then in November, he cut the rates to by 0.25 percentage points to 4.50% to 4.75%. Biden's inflation was up 9.1%. 9.1%. That's when the Fed is supposed to increase rates. In other words, take liquidity out of the market. But they reduced the rates for Sleepy Joe. So we know what side the Federal Reserve Bank is on. They're on the side of the left. They don't like Trump. They know that he wants to abolish the private banking cartels, and they're doing everything they can to harm his presidency. So the only tool that Trump has left at his disposal are tariffs, because he can weaken the dollar that way and force the Fed to lower interest rates. So again, that's what really happened. So as a lawyer, I can tell you that the circumstantial evidence is obvious and clear to me that the Federal Reserve Bank is carrying water for the Federalists. They don't like Trump, and they want to get him out of power. We just saw a video of someone who works for Jerome Powell saying that Powell wants to be remembered as the man who stopped Trump. So there you go. Most government employees are highly political, contrary to what you're told in the public school system, and they lean far left. And they also run academia. So what do you expect? Why do you think kids, especially people who go to colleges, are so anti-federalist? Okay, so that's the reason. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get into a video from Michael Bolton of the 10th Amendment Center, who I consider to be a visionary. I consider this guy to be one of the most educated, pro-constitutionalist people I've ever seen or met in my life. And I'm going to let you watch part of this video, and then we're going to get back into the main show where I discuss cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. So here we go.
And amplify a message in support of the Constitution and liberty, whether the establishment, the government wants us to or not. And I should mention, I'm going to cite a bunch of stuff in this episode. I've got a few other episodes. I've got a bunch of articles and original source documents. You're going to find those over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. I publish a blog post for each individual episode about 1 to 2 hours after the live stream is done. And there you're going to find a show links section where I'm including all the stuff that I'm mentioning so you can read and learn more in context on your own time. Let's start out with an article by Mike Meharry. This is a great way to sum it up. The Federal Reserve is the engine that drives the biggest, most powerful government in the history of the world. That's not a government of few and defined powers, as James Madison described it. Unfortunately, the people for generations and generations have let it get out of control and in many cases begged for it. But the Federal Reserve is the tool that they use to be able to actually prop this whole system up. Mike goes on, he says, we can trace the origins of this modern central bank back to the creation of the first bank of the United States, even before ratification of the Bill of Rights. I've done a couple of episodes trying to answer the question of when things went off the rails. When did we go from a limited constitutional republic to the monster state we have of today? And to the founders and the old revolutionaries, it was really about precedent. And when you establish a precedent for them to take, as Thomas Jefferson said in his argument against Hamilton's bank, which I will get to a little bit later on the show, if you take a single step beyond the limits of the Constitution, you take a boundless field of power, no longer susceptible of any definition. We'll see if I get that quote right off the top of my head. And so I've often cited 1791, the creation of the first bank, as the moment things went off the rails. Anyways, Mike goes on. He says, even then, it was built on dubious constitutional justifications. He's being kind. But it wasn't created without a fight. The arguments advanced by the bank's opponents provide a great deal of insight into the original understanding of the Constitution and the American system as it was conceived. The original Constitution, which only really lasted because of the bank for just a couple of years. And Mike points out that the story is about more than central banking. And I know we're talking about the Federal Reserve, but the powers that they use to create this and what they use to fund because of it goes way beyond just the creation of a bank. He said it's really a battle for the heart and soul of America's constitutional system. He says if you understand the constitutional arguments against the first bank of the U.S., and here we're going to hear from Edmund Randolph, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, three very influential figures at the time of the founding. He said you will have a solid grasp on the constitutional.
And so these guys are what we call anti-federalists. The Hamiltonians, the ones that are worshipped by the modern Marxist academia states, they're the people that are the federalists. Hamiltonians are federalists. The anti-federalists were the majority at the time of the Revolution. The federalists were more aligned with the king and the British economic system. So just so you understand, Hamilton didn't really become into favor until after what I consider to be the illegal and treasonous pact made at Jekyll Island in 1913, where our treasonous president enabled the Federal Reserve Act to be passed, where our lives are now controlled by the IRS and private banking cartels. Let's keep going.
Arguments against much of the unconstitutional monster state we live under today. Now, we know, and as I just mentioned right at the beginning, for those of you looking at the screen, this is my favorite Alexander Hamilton picture. It's him gagged. I was going to show a picture of the Aaron Burr thing, but, well, that's for maybe another episode. But the bank was the brainchild of Alexander Hamilton. Surprise, surprise. It was vehemently opposed by those three Virginians. But Hamilton wanted this as a tool to do all kinds of stuff. He was a supporter of a big, big government, something that would, well, no one really supported what he really wanted to go for, and that's why he had to flip-flop. He proposed one thing, or he said one thing before ratification, and then right after ratification, especially leading up to the creation of the bank, suddenly he started finding things like implied powers. So he couldn't justify the bank on the delegated powers in the Constitution. There was no debate over that. People were very clear, and you'd see this over and over in the debates, like, okay, we can't find it expressly delegated, so, well, how do you find this power? Now, people who are honest and doing the right thing, they're not going to try to first start out with what they want.
So I'll just give you, again, so most of you don't know my legal background if you're new to the channel. So I became a lawyer on the California State Bar Law Office Study Program. My background is in entrepreneurialism, construction, home building, and construction work pretty much. And then I did a short tour in the Marine Corps, and I'm disabled from the Marine Corps, but I'm one of these guys who prefers hanging out with blue collar types with calluses on their hands. And so I ended up becoming a member of the California Bar. And then later, getting a law degree from a traditional law school in California. And what I found disconcerting is that all of the professors to a T were hard left and anti anything that has to do with the anti-federalists. They were definitely pretty much all pro-Hamiltonian and pro-federalist because, again, it's a government agenda and they can't do anything to make the Federal Reserve private banking system look bad. So all the stuff about implied powers, it's talked about as if it really was in the Constitution, and it's not. And they don't even allow us to debate it. And if you talk about it, wait a minute, that's not authorized by the Constitution. They'll look at you like you're one of those crazy right-wing radical Republican, white racist homophobes and bigots. They literally would talk like that at these law schools. So just so you know, that's where your judges are coming from, guys. That's why we have such crummy decisions that keep coming down, because they're not trained in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. They're trained in some esoteric implied power that we have, right? And if you tell them that your rights come from a creator, they'll shit their pants, even though that's what it says in the Declaration of Independence. Let's keep going. It's unbelievable.
Want to get done and then figure out how to shoehorn it in the Constitution. It's supposed to be the other way around. But Hamilton, of course, wanted to shoehorn it in. He primarily made the case that suddenly after ratification, the word necessary no longer meant necessary. Suddenly, the word necessary meant just merely convenient. So instead of having to prove that a national bank was, quote, necessary and proper, as noted in Article 1, Section 8, for carrying out another delegated power, both necessary and proper, it would just make things more convenient to do stuff. So, and it's not hard for a creative mind to come up with things that government could do that could make it more convenient for them to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all these different things that have been delegated to it. Now, I covered this whole idea of necessary and proper in a recent episode. I don't know if I have it here. Necessary is supposed to mean necessary, just in September of this year. I will link to that in the show notes. Now, Hamilton also argued in favor of implied powers. Now, we know that implication, that was a real problem. Patrick Henry was very much concerned about implied powers
because they don't exist. Remember that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were designed to bind politicians and the government by the chains of the Constitution, so we would have less centralized control over our lives. Remember, we'd fought a bloody revolution to throw the chains off of the king, and a central bank is basically nothing more than having a king. That's really what it boils down to.
Implied authority. In his final ratification debate speeches in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, he warned about this. Hey, if you're not careful about really nailing this thing down, they're going to claim all kinds of implied authority. He warned against that in 1788, and here just a few years later, they went with it. We've got an article. I should have had this in my show notes, but TJ Martinell wrote a great article about Patrick Henry's last speeches and talking about implied authority. We just published it maybe an hour or two ago over at 10thamendmentcenter.com. Anyways, here's to Hamilton himself. For example, here's one of his arguments in support of the bank. This is February 23rd, 1791. He said, "It is not denied that there are implied," and he highlights the word implied, there are implied as well as express powers, and that the former are as effectually delegated as the latter. So Hamilton here is definitely saying, you have this idea of delegated powers that are few and defined. That's how Madison described it. He was a co-author with Hamilton of the Federalist Papers, and they made the case that the powers delegated to the federal government would be few and defined, very clearly spelled out, not just something that was made out of implication. And here's Hamilton just a couple years later saying, well, there's definitely implied powers and they have the same authority as anything that's spelled out in the document in and of itself. And in fact, if you Command or Control F through the document, which I will link to in the show notes, you can find the word implied 10, 12 times. He just really keeps hammering.
Now, for those of you who don't really know a whole lot about who Hamilton is, I'm going to let my friend Brett Pike once again sort of help you understand a little bit about who Hamilton is, all right? So just give me 1 second here. Let's do it. Sure we got sound.
Everyone knows that Alexander Hamilton was killed by the sitting vice president of the United States of America. But did you know he was blackmailed? That he was the center of America's first political sex scandal? That a future president of the United States also planned to kill him? And the only reason that didn't happen is because Aaron Burr intervened, as in the same Aaron Burr that would later kill Hamilton. Well, the story would start when Hamilton met this woman, Maria Reynolds. And it wasn't long before they hit it off, if you know what I mean. But the problem was she was married. And when her husband found out, rather than confronting Hamilton, he blackmailed him. And Hamilton was paying this guy big time hush money. The husband was involved in other financial crimes. And when he got caught, people saw that he was taking money from Alexander Hamilton. And that's when future President James Monroe was brought in to investigate. They thought Hamilton was misappropriating public funds. So Hamilton goes to Monroe and he comes clean. He said it was hush money from his personal bank account. Well, fast forward a few years later, and Hamilton's having his famous beef with Thomas Jefferson. So Jefferson's ally releases the details of Hamilton's affair. And Monroe was a Jefferson guy. So Hamilton publicly accuses James Monroe of dishonorable behavior and betrayal. And back then, those were fighting words.
Absolutely.
Because back then, people had honor. So after Monroe heard that, he wrote a letter to Hamilton challenging him to a duel, to fight to the death. And it looked like it was going to happen, until in a twist of fate, Aaron Burr interjected, and he convinced them not to have a duel. But a few years later, while he was the sitting vice president of the United States, Burr would kill Hamilton in a duel. And Monroe would go on to become one of the 10 best presidents in the history of the United States. True. He purchased Florida, the Monroe Doctrine, paid off a significant portion of America's debt, got rid of all internal taxes. There was already no federal income tax. That didn't come until 1913. But even taxes on things like alcohol, he got rid of them all. He was so popular that no one even bothered to run against him when he ran for re-election. But of course, of all the founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton's the one that the system loves to lionize, because he was the big government guy, because he was the pro-bank guy. So of course, that's who they make into a hero. Not this absolute legend who got rid of all internal taxes and told Europe to stay out of our side of the world. And this is why I write books on how information is controlled, our rights, about that banking system, and how money corrupts systems, the history of fake news, and so much more. Because we owe it to our kids to teach them what America is really about. ClassicalLearner.com.
And again, give me a bunch of ones for my friend Brett Pike. I think that he is truly one of the best out of all the homeschooling programs that exist in this country. So he writes books to help parents homeschool their kids and get them off of the national education Marxist influenced system that's trying to brainwash little boys into thinking they're girls and little girls into thinking that they're boys, and pushing for this globalist one world government that we all know our founding fathers, at least the anti-federalists, did not want. But now at least you've gotten a little bit of an understanding of who was Hamilton, because all you've heard is how great he was. The Federalist Papers are the only things that you really know about our founding fathers, but they were not popular at the time they were written. The Federalists were not popular either. So let's get back into Michael Bolden's video so you can learn a little bit more about what Hamilton did to help destroy our country and our financial freedom, our ability to have freedom over our lives from a decentralized currency.
This home over and over and over. So the big things that Hamilton is basically saying, he acknowledges that there is no express delegation to incorporate anything, much less a bank. So he's saying, well, there's now implied powers. It's implied that the central government needs this authority to be able to, I don't know, regulate commerce or create post offices, et cetera, et cetera. And then, well, necessary doesn't mean necessary. It means, well, this will help make things more.
Now, let's get into abuse. Again, we've seen a lot of the stuff with Doge where we've uncovered billions of dollars were being used to pay non-governmental organizations who can circumvent the Constitution with your tax dollars to flood our country with at least 20 million illegal aliens, at least 5 million known gotaways. This is one example. So unfortunately, under the US Census, illegal aliens are counted in the census towards House seats. So what the Democrats, the Federalists, did is they set up what are called sanctuary cities. So obviously the illegals go to these sanctuary cities. Why? Because they refuse to cooperate with the federal government in enforcing our nation's immigration laws. So what happens is once they get flooded in to a sanctuary city and the next census comes around, the Democrats will pick up House seats without a single vote being cast. So the illegals don't even need to vote. They just need to have their bodies present. So the left was throwing millions of dollars, providing free rent, free homes, SNAP benefits by giving them TPS under Joe Biden. And that enables the Democrats now to pick up House seats. Now, by most estimates, California would lose at least 5 House seats and become a red state again if the illegal aliens that lived in California were deported. So just to give you an idea of how private organizations are used to circumvent the Constitution and how they never seem to make money. For example, Amtrak. They don't make any money, but we still have to pay for them. Why? The U.S. Post Office, a quasi-private organization that survives with government handouts. And we know that the letter carriers union supported who? Kamala Harris. And we know we had vote by mail. So it wouldn't be that hard for someone who is an anti-federalist to think, well, wait a minute, these people, the Republicans want to get rid of the post office. So why wouldn't they just throw away ballots from red districts and maybe even fill out ballots because they're non-secured now, because now it's vote by mail, so they're unsecure. It's not like absentee ballots at all. It's a completely different system. And so why wouldn't they just use their friends at the Democrat Party to rig elections? And that is the argument that a lot of people made and a lot of people believe, and many courts also believe occurred in the last election. I don't think anybody really believes that Sleepy Joe got 80 million votes. Anyways, let's get back into what Michael Bolden has to say.
Convenient because of its implication for the power of the federal government. Anyways, it's pretty bad stuff. But on the opposing side, we have Edmund Randolph, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson. And here, Edmund Randolph, one of his opinions, this is February 12th, 1791. He said, the power of creating corporations is not expressly given to Congress. That's obvious. He says that the power of creating corporations is not expressly given to Congress is obvious. It's very clear. Everyone understood that creating a bank, incorporating a bank, was not in the document. You can read it yourself. It's not there. Everyone knew that. So he's saying, well, let's look at the arguments that are going to be made in favor of this. So if it can be a power that's exercised, Randolph said, it must be first, because the nature of the federal government implies it. So he's laying out the arguments of the Hamiltonians, and then he goes through each one of them and rejects all of them pretty straightforward. 1, because the nature of the federal government implies it. 2, because it is involved in some of the specified powers of legislation. Or 3, because it is necessary and proper to carry into execution some of the specified powers. I'm not going to go into any of these in any real detail, but I want to just give you some highlights. And of course, as I keep mentioning, I will link to these original documents in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path2liberty, so you can read it in full detail if you want to get Randolph's arguments against the national bank and against the doctrine of implication and his support of the original legal meaning of necessary and proper and the like. And responding to the implied power, he's rejecting the Hamiltonian view. He said to be implied in the nature of the federal government would beget a doctrine so indefinite as to grasp every power. In other words, to claim that they can charter or they can incorporate a bank because it's implied in the nature of the federal government. That's all they need to do. The government is not one of limited delegated powers. It's the British system where they can just do basically whatever they want. Now, that was really, in essence, that's arbitrary government. A government can determine the extent of its own power, what it can do by implication of its authority. That's something that they would have called arbitrary government during the Revolution. And that was listed as one of the grievances in the Declaration of Independence. So here it is, just not that long out of the gate. And there are people there who are doing what they fought a long, bloody war to get away from. Maybe Hamilton never really wanted to get away from it in the first place. So to be implied that they can create this bank would basically give them unlimited power, a doctrine so indefinite as to grasp every power. Now, he does take a little bit more of a middle ground on some things, but he talks a little bit about the necessary and proper clause here in this way. He says to be necessary is to be incidental. Now, necessary and proper, we know that Hamilton is saying it means convenient, but really the original legal meaning of this is something called the legal doctrine of principles and incidents. Incidental power is not the same as implied power. An incidental power, they have the power to establish post offices. But it's an incidental power, something that's necessary to establish a post office. You have to have employees to be in that post office. So that's one very simplistic example of this type of thing. It can't be greater. It has to be like without that power, you can't actually do it. Without the incidental power, you can't do the delegated power. That's the whole point of the word necessary. So Randolph says to be necessary is to be incidental, or in other words, may be demonstrated, denominated by the natural. Wow, I'm struggling with reading today. To be necessary is to be incidental, or in other words, may be denominated the natural means of executing a power. And he goes on, the phrase and proper, if it has any meaning, does not enlarge the powers of Congress, but rather restricts them. Of course, people treat the necessary and proper.
Right, and that was the whole point of the Constitution, was to restrict the power of the government. It was the first document in any government in history that was designed to bind the government and restrict their power, not to give it more power. It was basically a guideline to limit the power of the government. But the Federalists and their banker friends didn't like that. And so that's why I wanted to show you this before we get into our discussion on cryptocurrency. It's really, really important that you understand. As a lawyer, I always want to lay a foundation before I put on my evidence. So let's get into it.
Clause is the whatever the hell they want clause today. That includes politicians, that includes advocacy groups, that includes average people. Oh, I think such and such should be done. This is necessary and proper to achieve the things that I like. So, but this is a warning. Still, again, Randolph with another warning. He actually, if you read through this in comparison, especially to Jefferson and also a bit to Madison, Randolph is a little bit more middle ground between them and the Hamiltonian view, but it's still pretty hardcore in comparison to anybody today. No one takes this type of view today. However, he writes, let it be propounded as an eternal question to those who would build new powers on this clause, whether the latitude of construction which they arrogate will not terminate in an unlimited power in Congress. Again, here he is warning not just on the idea of implied powers, but on necessary being something other than the principles of incidental powers rather than implied powers or convenient powers. He's saying this is going to terminate, most likely, in an unlimited power in Congress. And if we are not there today, we're certainly pretty damn close.
So how many of you think that we're not there today? I think we are. I think that the government is out of control, absolutely out of control. And this is what our founding fathers warned us about. They warned us against this. But you won't hear about any of this in the public school system. In fact, the public school system, starting under Barry Soetoro, Barack Obama, led a campaign to start destroying statues of the anti-federalists, people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, to try to pull down their statues. Well, because they had slaves. So therefore, even the Bill of Rights is racist, basically, because we know that the goal of the National Education Association and the globalists is to create what we had under the king, which is basically we're all serfs. And then you have the wealthy class under the king. And that's, but now the king is the bank. And so that's what exactly what has happened.
I actually covered, I'm not going to talk too much more about necessary and proper. If you really want to dig in deep and learn more about the doctrine of principles and incidents and the precursor to the necessary and proper, etc., I did a pretty long episode on this, somewhere around 35 minutes or so back in 2019. Necessary and proper, not anything and everything. Of course, that will be linked to in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Someone tells me that audio is skipping. Hopefully you guys are having okay, or maybe that was just an issue on one of the platforms. But if anything, I do record this locally, so I do upload that to the platforms a little bit later, at least the archive platforms where we put the video like on Gab and Minds and Brighteon. And of course, we have the audio-only podcast edition on Apple and Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, et cetera, et cetera. I should also mention that the only way that we're able to do this kind of work is through the financial faith and support of our members. I know this is a quick advertisement here, but without the support of our members, we don't have the time or the resources to be able to get this kind of information together. We've got over 10,000 articles on our website. I've been doing this podcast for over 4 years now. We're doing our best to reach and teach people about the Constitution and liberty and how to defend both, whether the government wants us to or not. And I want to take a quick moment to say thank you to a handful of people who have joined us as members recently. There's Dan in Idaho, Scott in Missouri, Ronald in California, Cynthia in California, Richard in Texas, Carol in Oklahoma, Lewis in Florida, Henry in North Carolina, and a bunch of other people. I really, really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. If you want to join them, it's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Anyways, let me jump over to James Madison here. He's next. And I did another episode. We're going to be citing a lot of episodes in this episode. In 1791, here's from the overview of it. James Madison gave 2 major speeches on the national bank, opposing it primarily on grounds that it wasn't a power expressly delegated in the Constitution. He also, which is the 10th Amendment argument, that's the argument that Jefferson made as well. Madison also rejected claims that use the general welfare and necessary and proper clauses along with the power to borrow money and the preamble. Here, for example, from his speech of February 2nd, again, he's talking about necessary and proper and the doctrine of principles and incidents. He says, whatever meaning this clause may have, none can be admitted that would give an unlimited discretion to Congress. Again, warning about unlimited discretion, unlimited.
And that's precisely what happened with the Federal Reserve Bank. I mean, they have secret meetings. 9 people get to decide your fate economically. That's unacceptable. It's in violation of the Sunshine Law as well, that they're having private secret meetings. I mean, how hard would it be for somebody like Powell or these guys over at the Federal Reserve to reach out to Nancy Pelosi and say, hey, we're going to lower interest rates. Maybe you might want to buy some options in Google or some high volatility stock. I mean, it does not meet the definition of limited government at all. Let's keep listening.
Power was what Randolph did, and here James Madison, the so-called father of the Constitution, is saying the same thing. He said, its meaning must, according to the natural and obvious force of the terms and the context, be limited to means necessary to the end and incident to the nature of the specified powers. Again, necessary means necessary. Without it, it can't exist. Not just whatever the hell you want, not just convenient. That's how they were twisting it. And so Madison was very, very forceful, very straightforward on that. Now, for more details, you definitely want to check out that episode that I just mentioned on Madison. And here again, if proceeded he, Congress, by virtue of the power to borrow, and this is Madison's warning now, again, unlimited power, can create the means of lending, and in pursuance of these means can incorporate a bank, they may do anything, whatever creative of like means. So Madison, just like Edmund Randolph, warning about unlimited power, he warns they may do anything, whatever creative, and they do anything, whatever creative of like means on almost every single issue today. So make sure, again, to check out that episode on Madison. I will link to it in the show notes. Here's one more from Thomas Jefferson. He opposed it primarily on 10th Amendment grounds. I've got another episode that I will link. He also rejected claims that use the commerce, general welfare, and necessary and proper clauses. And this is why Mike Meharry in that article was talking about how, well, if you understand the arguments against the national bank, you're going to learn a lot about the original legal meaning of the Constitution because, of course, people who support the monster state, when they get rejected on saying, well, this is regulating interstate commerce. Well, if they lose that argument, they'll say, well, then it's general welfare. If they lose that argument, oh, well, it's necessary and proper. Oh, they lose that. They just keep going and, oh, it's implied powers. So you will understand that debate, because that's exactly what they were doing in 1791. Now, Jefferson's argument, which I'm going to link here as well, it literally starts. He first lays out, this is what the bill that we're discussing does. That he makes 8 points, and then he starts his argument against it, and he starts with the 10th Amendment. He says, I consider the foundation of the Constitution is laid on this ground, that all powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by the states are reserved to the states or to the people. The final version was a little different. This was 10 months before it was ratified, but that's how Jefferson said, like, look, as soon as you can't go beyond these limits. He said to take a single step beyond the boundaries thus specially drawn around the powers of Congress is to take possession of a boundless field of power no longer susceptible of any definition. This, like Randolph and Madison, is a warning that authorizing a bank, something that's not delegated to the federal government in the Constitution, will lead to unlimited power. That's why it's so important to understand these original arguments, because they're really talking about precedent. And as soon as you give them that single step to tyranny, they're going to take however many thousands of steps over time to get to despotism, and they get to the
Right. And if you don't fight against it, a custom by operation of law becomes the law. And so although it's not in the Constitution to create a private, illegal Federal Reserve banking system, if you, the people, allow it to continue happening, it becomes a custom, and then by operation of law, it becomes the law. And that's why we're going to get into cryptocurrency and decentralized currency in just a minute. I just want to let Mike finish up what he's got to say, but please share this with your friends, and always make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure to get the word out about my channel, because I'm one of the few lawyers who actually understands the principles of natural law and the foundations of this country. Being a non-academic, not being brainwashed by the public school system, it gives me the ability to think outside the box, to bring this great, valuable information to free thinkers and people who are still capable of critical thinking. Let's keep listening.
Pretty quickly today. So Madison himself actually made the case in his debates, and I covered that in the episode, that during the Philadelphia Convention, there was actually a proposal to authorize incorporating corporations, maybe specifically even a bank, for example. And Madison said, well, we considered it and rejected it. We didn't want the federal government to have this power. And that was additional reinforcement to say, well, no, they thought about it and they said, no, we're not going to include this. So therefore, the people of the several states were not actually even debating about that particular power. Madison would know, and he didn't claim it at the time, but it was his proposal. So it's actually an interesting level of integrity for him to be able to do something like that. Anyway, so here's again Jefferson talking about necessary and proper. He said, the Constitution allows only the means which are necessary. Necessary means necessary. It doesn't mean something else. The Constitution allows only the means which are necessary, not those which are merely convenient for effecting the enumerated powers. If such a latitude of construction be allowed to this phrase as to give any non-enumerated power, it will go to everyone. For there is not one which ingenuity may not torture into a convenience, in some instance or other, to someone of so long a list of enumerated powers. It would swallow up all the delegated powers and reduce the whole to one power. So if you can just say necessary means convenient, you don't need the rest of the document because, well, it's just necessary and proper. It's convenient to whatever the heck they want. And Jefferson really hammered that home. Now, of course, if you want more detail on Jefferson's views, there's the link to that episode, Thomas Jefferson, the Constitution versus the National Bank. I did that episode October of 2020. Now, although the National Bank, George Washington signed this thing into law. And I know Brian McClanahan told me about this, and I don't think he was surprised that it happened. But for some reason, I think about people like Jefferson, Randolph, Madison, very, very powerful, very, very influential Virginians, of which George Washington was one as well. They're all telling him, don't do this. Washington actually had two veto messages ready to roll, but decided to go with it. I have a hard time grasping it, but I guess he was on the Hamiltonian big government side, and I got to just get through that and realize.
Well, originally, Washington was definitely an anti-federalist. And there are a lot of conspiracy theories as to why Washington went for the central bank system and why he allowed the Constitution to be subverted. But many believe it's because of his strong connection with the Freemasons. And of course, there was an internal battle in the Freemasons as well, just like we have in our uniparty system between anti-federalists and federalists. But like modern politicians, it is my suspicion that Washington was probably blackmailed. He probably had a secret affair with someone or something along those lines, like they're doing with the Epstein Island stuff. But ultimately, Washington sold us out the same way that Woodrow Wilson did in 1913.
That because of this, he helped bring down the Republic in a way. That's a real problem there. But he did sign it. It did not last forever. And even though it wasn't permanent, we still got three big things. Of course, the one I keep mentioning over and over and over, precedent. Randolph, of course, warned of unlimited power in Congress. Madison warned that Congress may do anything, whatever, creative. Jefferson said a boundless field of power that they would have. Precedent is what established more and more and more in the years to come until, well, instead of having a constitutional republic, principles of the revolution where liberty was the primary object, as Patrick Henry once described it, we have absolute federal supremacy almost in all situations. And then, of course, number two, we had the expansive view of the necessary and proper clause. And years later, in the McCulloch versus Maryland case, Chief Justice John Marshall adopted the Hamiltonian view that necessary means convenient. And Randy Barnett, in his research, points out that, well, in law school, no one even learns about the opposing views of Madison, Jefferson, and Randolph or anyone else. They only learn the Hamiltonian view. They only learn the John Marshall view, repeating Hamilton in some places word for word. And that's it. It's as if there's no debate over it, and we shouldn't be surprised then that all the so-called experts think that.
And as I was telling you previously, the public education system and the government-run schools are federalist. They do not like Thomas Jefferson, okay? And when I went to law school, I was blown away at how far left and Marxist-leaning every single law professor was. And then later on at the prosecutor's office, I was shocked to see that not only the public defenders, but the prosecutors were all Obama supporters. But I guess it makes sense that when you work for the government, you want the government to have more power. And why would that be? Because you get more money, you get a better pension, you get a better life at the taxpayer's expense. And that's why I support the concept of limited government and enumerated powers as an anti-federalist. Let's keep listening to Mike.
Necessary means convenient. And then, of course, this all leads to an even more powerful and destructive central bank, which is the third thing that we have today. There's probably many other things that we could say are an outgrowth of this, but these are the big ones. Now, Mike Meharry went to a lot more detail on this in a book that I mentioned I was going to point out to you, The National Bank versus the Constitution. We've had this available as a free ebook for our members since he...
Now, What's the Matter You says that Mike confirmed that case law is unconstitutional. And I understand his point of view, but case law is a provision of being able to have a court be able to interpret what the law is or isn't when there's a jurisdictional split. And that was carried over from English common law into American common law. My interpretation of what Mike was just saying is that courts don't have the right to reinterpret something that's black and white. For example, the Second Amendment specifically says, shall not be infringed. And so for a court to come along and try to interpret that is meaning something other than what it says clearly is beyond their enumerated powers as judges, in my humble opinion. But we can continue having that debate. But again, the purpose of the federal government was what? To provide for a navy, to regulate disputes between the states, and commerce. Can you guys tell me any other enumerated power that they have? Very little, right? Not much. Let's keep going.
Finished it last summer, but we finally made it available in print version. And I know a number of people purchased copies of that over the Thanksgiving holiday. So I've got a link to it. The National Bank versus the Constitution. It's just a little handbook, but it's got really good info on those constitutional arguments. How many chapters is this thing? It is 11 short chapters. They're generally like 6 pages each, like talking about the Federal Reserve, Hamilton's arguments, the power to charter, Madison views, the Commerce Clause arguments, general welfare, the necessary and proper arguments. It's $15. We will mail you a copy pretty quickly. And I will link to that in the show notes. The alternative version is you can get it for $2 if you're okay getting an ebook. Members, all of our members, get all of our all of our book publications for free on members.10thamendmentcenter.com, our members website. And not only if it starts out at $2 a month, not only do you get this book, you get like 10 of them. So technically, if you wanted to game the system and scam us, it's kind of a scammy approach. You could sign up for the $2, download all the books, and then just cancel it. And basically you get everything for $2. I mean, I really believe that you are going to really see the value of the work that we're doing here and want to help us do more. So every couple of bucks of that dirty, nasty government fiat that they keep devaluing, we use to throw back in the face of the empire to reach and teach people about the original legal meaning of the Constitution and liberty, how to defend both when government refuses to do so, which is constantly. And it ultimately, as John Dickinson put it, it is up to the supreme sovereignty or final authority of the people to protect and preserve their own Constitution and their own liberty. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members is where you get that the ebook, the PDF downloads. $2 a month for all of them, or we'll mail you one for $15. Anyways, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. There are some free ways to support our work as well. You don't have to throw money at us.
All right, so that's pretty much the end of this video, but I'm going to get into some more videos from Mike in the future. I really like him a lot. It's the 10th Amendment Center. Hold on, I'll give you the handle on his channel. The 10th Amendment Center, and I'm going to drop the link for you to this video really quick here. Let me find it. Actually, let me just go to his channel so I can give you his actual link. Just bear with me, guys. Bear with me. Please make sure to support Mike's channel. I think that he is a real visionary, a real legit dude, and definitely somebody that we need to follow over at the 10th Amendment Center. Michael Bolden, great guy. And you know, guys, I'm honestly shocked that we don't have thousands of people watching this show today. So please take some time to save this video to your favorites, because that really helps us with the algorithm. And also like and subscribe to channels that are like-minded, because that's one of the ways that we drive the algorithm to this channel. If you're subscribed to channels like 10th Amendment Center and to cryptocurrency channels and channels about gold and silver, that sends a message to the algorithm that I'm aligned with these types of channels, and it will send out more of these notifications. Because I got my start primarily doing Cop Watch videos, YouTube really only likes to share my videos with people that are into Cop Watch videos. But the Cop Watch thing is a very tiny part of the problem. There wouldn't be a police state problem if we were to have control over our Constitution and our currency. And so that's why I like to reverse engineer top down, and I don't do a lot of Cop Watch shows anymore. I'll do some more in the future, because government accountability is what this channel is really about. However, if you don't understand why we're in the position that we are today, you're just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. by trying to get rid of qualified immunity and all this other stuff. We need to bind the government with the chains of the Constitution, and all of those other things will start to fall in place. So that's why I'm all about the 10th Amendment Center, because this guy is really where I'm aligned. Now, I just have one more video that I'm going to share with you from Brett Pike about why people are in the predicament that they're in today.
Number one lesson in public school is that truth comes from authority. So if you repeat what the teacher says and repeat what's in the textbook, then you're smart. And if you don't, you're dumb. The second lesson is that your self-esteem comes from authority. So if you don't repeat what the teacher said, you're dumb. The third lesson is that you should never work on anything that's not approved by authority. So you'll go 15 years without ever choosing your own assignment, and you only work on assignments given to you by the teacher, just like a 9-to-5. It's designed to create intellectual dependence. The fourth lesson is that you should know your place. Go to class when you're told to be there. Sit where you're told to sit, and make sure you raise your hand if you have to go to the bathroom. You get permission to pee. The fifth lesson is indifference. Students literally throw their assignments in the garbage when they're done because it doesn't mean anything. It's just paperwork again and again and again for 18 straight years. It doesn't matter. The sixth lesson is confusion, because assignments are never in context. And the last lesson is that Big Brother is always watching. Cameras, metal detectors, hall monitors. There is no privacy. You belong to the machine. These are the 7 hidden lessons in all public schools, and John Taylor Gatto wrote about them in Dumbing Us Down. And it's why nearly 4 million Americans are homeschooling today. So reach out if you'd like to learn more. And check out my books on entrepreneurship, healthy eating, and the corruption of the food system, the Bill of Rights, morality, and so much more. ClassicalLearner.com.
Again, that's my buddy Brett Pike. Please make sure to check out his channel. And even if you don't have kids who you're homeschooling, find a way to donate whatever you can to his cause. I'm not really shilling for him. I don't get any money out of it or Federal Reserve note, fiat currency out of it. I support him because I support his cause. He is an anti-federalist like me and like most of you. So let's get now back into the meat of the show. Let me quickly, privates, let's get into cryptocurrency and let's talk about it, because this is really what we're here for, right, guys? So let me try to get this thing squared away so it fits in the screen here for you. Give me 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you can see it. Let me know, guys, if you're having any issues seeing this thing. If it's too... And so I am going to be speaking on a panel, a cryptocurrency panel coming up here. And so this is a work in progress. So forgive me if there are errors or typos or grammar issues. You can see there's still some formatting problems. Now, of course, it just got knocked off. Oh, boy. Just work with me, guys. We'll get it back up. I was doing this earlier and the same thing happened. Boy, oh, boy. Try to push this back in. So if anybody has any questions while I'm trying to get this thing back up for you guys, go ahead and throw them in the sidebar there. There we go. All right. So let's see if this is a better way to do it. Well, I just want to make sure you guys can see it. Is it too small for you guys to read along with me? All right. So what we're going to talk about now is, let me see here. And let me see here. And we will do a show, What's the Matter You and Rami, about case law, because there's a lot of things that I absolutely agree with you guys on, but I don't believe that case law was something that was designed to serve the king. I believe that case law was designed to be able to eliminate misunderstandings or discrepancies in a poorly written statute, for example. But I believe that it's definitely been abused. There's no question about that. So we'll try it this way. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, now I'm just trying to get my cursor to work. All right, so we talked a little bit earlier about anti-money laundering compliance. And so the big issue with cryptocurrency that people like Pocahontas, Elizabeth Warren talk about are, well, if you allow cryptocurrency and don't allow the IRS to know everything that you're doing, well, people are going to use it to buy illegal drugs. Well, great. Here's the problem with that argument. Why are drugs illegal? As a libertarian, I can tell you that the better approach would simply to be this: make drugs legal and people will stop trying to traffic them. When alcohol was outlawed, that gave rise to the mafia and bootlegging, right? Remember this? Remember there was an amendment to the Constitution that outlawed alcohol, and that now that alcohol is legal again, we don't have that big problem like we used to have, right? And also, why not increase the penalties for non-adults being provided these illegal drugs, like make it a capital offense to give a minor child drugs? I mean, there are other ways around it, but this is what their argument is that the Federalists have about decentralized currency. They want to make sure that they know everything that you do and they have control over every aspect of your life. And this is why they're against cryptocurrency. And in fact, this is one of the reasons that many scholars say that gold was outlawed by, I think, Roosevelt, where we had to turn in all of our gold. I mean, can you believe that? Could you believe modernly, would you ever turn in your gold to the government? Come on. Would you? I wouldn't. All right. So the advent of Bitcoin in 2008, introduced by the pseudonymous name Satoshi Nakamoto, marked the beginning of a decentralized financial revolution. So we'll get into another show about who created it, who this Satoshi Nakamoto was. I know many of you who are critical thinkers believe that it was created by the CIA. I don't know, but I don't know why the CIA would want to create a decentralized currency when their goal is to make the US government and the Federal Reserve banking system that they serve more powerful. But we can talk about that in another program. Now, cryptocurrencies, because I want to explain to you again, since I'm a lawyer, I want to lay a foundation. Cryptocurrencies operate on something called blockchain technology, and it's a public ledger that ensures tamper-proof transactions through a decentralized consensus mechanism like proof of work. They call it POW, or proof of work. Now, people will say that cryptocurrency, great, it's on a blockchain, but with quantum computing, it'll be broken. And that's probably true. But quantum computing will also help strengthen the blockchain. So there will always be a battle of cops and robbers between like someone over in Pakistan or communist China trying to get their hands on your crypto by breaking the blockchain. And so it's just like your computer gets a virus and then they create a patch and then you get an antivirus, right? So that's always going to be an issue without question. Just like somebody could bust into your E-Trader account and try to take your stocks. Same concept. Now, as cryptocurrencies gained popularity, their legal status became a contentious issue, with regulators grappling to fit digital assets into existing frameworks such as securities law. And this really started under the Democrats because they're more closely aligned with Federalists. So they don't like cryptocurrency because they want to be able to control more of your life, because they believe that more government and less freedom is better for you. You will own nothing and be happy. That's the World Economic Forum, Davos philosophy. And those are the billionaires who have these politicians in their hip pockets. So the AML regulations and contract law became an issue for the Democrats, the Federalists, to try and basically stop cryptocurrency. And we saw that the Biden administration used government agencies to go after blockchain and cryptocurrency people like crazy, which really, really hurt cryptocurrency and its growth. So this article is going to be an educational tool for my students, you, to provide a clear overview of cryptocurrency through the lens of recent case law and regulatory developments. Now I'm going to address three core areas: securities regulation and the application of the Howey test, which we're going to talk about in a minute, AML criminal law challenges, and the jurisdictional issues in decentralized systems. All right. So the first step is to talk about securities regulation and the Howey test. So let me just make it look more lawyerly here. You always want to put the case law in italics. That's just part of the deal. Now, sorry, I'm trying to put it on mute every time I clear my throat because I know it sounds terrible. Now, in SEC versus Ripple Labs, this is a 2024 case. This is a Biden one. Biden's Security and Exchange Commission alleged that Ripple's sale of XRP tokens constituted an unregistered securities offering. And we're going to talk about what securities are in a minute. The court's July 2023 ruling by Judge Torres was a landmark decision. It held that Ripple's institutional sales of XRP met the Howey test. All right. Hold on one second. You can also underline it, but we're going to do it in the California style manual method, which is italics. I know that if you use the blue book style, you'll often underline the case law. All right. So the Howey test, secondary market sales on exchanges did not exist at the time. So they lacked the expectation of profits tied to Ripple's efforts, as they lacked that. So the distinction has significant implications for crypto exchanges and secondary market transactions, suggesting that not all tokens are securities. And the case is under appeal right now at the Second Circuit, which will further clarify Howey's application to digital assets. All right. So basically, let me go down here and I'll just tell you really quick. I got a lot of stuff here to show you guys, but all right. Okay. Whether a cryptocurrency is a security depends on its specific characteristics and how it's offered, as determined by the Howey test from SEC versus W.J. Howey. And that's at 328 U.S. 293. It's a 1946 case, which defines security as an investment of money in a common enterprise with an expectation of profits primarily from the efforts of others. Some cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are generally not considered to be securities due to their decentralized nature and lack of reliance on a central entity's efforts, while others, like certain initial coin offerings, ICOs, or tokens tied to a company's promises, are. Okay, so that's really what makes it different. So because Bitcoin is decentralized and it's really based on the efforts of people involved in the blockchain, like you and I buying it, it's not a security. And that's why you can't buy Bitcoin, for example, on E-Trader, right? On E-Trade, but you could buy an ETF, which is tied to a crypto. So Michael Ehline, with the creation of MicroStrategy, now Strategy, was able to sort of get around this by buying a ton of Bitcoin and then becoming like a Bitcoin exchange, right? Or not a Bitcoin exchange, strike that, but a Bitcoin treasury. And so that's kind of how he was able to make MicroStrategy so powerful. Now, let's get into SEC versus Coinbase Inc. So in SEC versus Coinbase Inc., The SEC, Biden's SEC, alleged that Coinbase operated as an unregistered security exchange by facilitating trades in digital assets that are deemed securities. The district court's March 2024 order denied Coinbase's motion on the pleadings and certified the case for interlocutory appeal. So an appeal on a question of law alone. So in other words, before the case was entirely decided on its merits, the judge allowed it to go up on a question of law alone. And so really interesting because it's a case of first impression. So because there was no established case law, the court needed guidance from a higher court, if that makes sense. It was a difficult legal issue of first impression. So the Second Circuit's pending review will address whether the secondary market transaction involving investment contracts absent direct issuer obligations. So if I say, hey, look, if you invest in my company, I'm going to give you a bunch of Ethereum or something like that. Well, since it's based on a promise that could meet the Howey test standards, and therefore it's a security, as opposed to being just a free-flowing decentralized currency. So even though Coinbase sells both, if they sell a security and a promise that they made, or give you a security in exchange for fiat currency, for example, that could be a problem. So this case underscores the tension between the government, the SEC, and their enforcement approach and the need for regulatory clarity. And that's why Trump was getting all these laws passed before midterms, because if Powell keeps messing with interest rates, there's a high probability the Democrats will get back into power and cryptocurrency will crash again. And I'm not going to get into the teaching points. That's more for my class. All right. So now let's talk about the anti-money laundering provisions and criminal law challenges. So AML is a real popular term now in crypto law. So, and again, crypto law is still like the new frontier for lawyers. And so I have the advantage of having been involved in crypto for a while, and I do a lot of research, a lot of legal research on crypto law. And I'm one of the very few lawyers that actually practices, as part of my practice, a little bit of crypto law. So I'm just sharing with you stuff that I think will help you guys navigate what's going on. And this is by no means a treatise on crypto law. There's a lot more that we could talk about, like crypto IRAs, for example, which like a crypto IRA that could be in the nature of a Roth. So you're not going to be subjected to capital gains tax. So let's say you get a crypto related Roth IRA, and that's got to be a special IRA, which I have a buddy of mine that has another crypto related channel, which we'll get into at another date. I'm trying to have him come on as a guest, because could you imagine if you had bought $1,000 worth of crypto and put it into a crypto Roth IRA, and now it's selling at 114,000 a coin, and then you wouldn't pay, that would not be subject to taxes. I mean, you would be looking good, right? You'd be looking good. So now in United States versus Harmon, the defendant operated Helix, a Bitcoin mixer that obscured transaction details. In other words, offered people purchasing crypto economic privacy from government, which I believe we're entitled to under the Fourth Amendment, by the way. But the court held that Helix's operations constituted an unlicensed money transmission business under the BSA, reinforcing that crypto businesses must register as money transmitters. This case illustrates the tension between privacy-enhancing technologies and AML compliance, as mixers could be used both for lawful privacy as well as illegal activities. So there you go. The blockchain is being invaded by the IRS because they want to take your money, right? And once the Democrats get into power, we know they're going to try to tax it even more and get all of it if they can, so they can give it to their public school teachers and the people who donate money to their party through their government employee unions. And that's really what the whole point is behind the way they do things in that particular political party. All right. So IRS versus Coinbase, a 2017 case. In IRS versus Coinbase Inc., which is NDCal, and it's a 2017 case, the IRS sought customer data to enforce tax compliance, of course, highlighting the traceability of blockchain transactions despite perceived anonymity. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm on the blockchain, that nobody can track me. That's not true, especially if you buy your crypto on an exchange, right? You take your cold storage wallet, you plug it in, and now they know that it went into that particular wallet from you. So if another transaction comes out of that wallet, that is going to be a taxable event, even if you use it to buy tires for your car. So that's something you need to think about. It's not private like its original intent. Not at all. They can track you down. Now, the court narrowed the IRS's summons, but upheld its authority, emphasizing that crypto transactions are subject to tax reporting. Another reason why we should abolish the income tax and return the country back to a tariff-based system. Does anybody here actually think that it's anybody at the government's business to know how much money you make? Do you? Do you think that the Fourth Amendment gives them the right to know how much you earned? That's none of their business unless you're a corporation. If you're a private citizen, your earnings are the work of your sweat. That's your money. It shouldn't be subject to taxes. But it is. So unfortunately. So now, one second. Jurisdictional challenges in decentralized systems is the next issue that we're going to cover. Cryptocurrencies operate on borderless networks, all right? Complicating traditional jurisdictional frameworks. But what it really does is it pulls the fiat currency out of SWIFT. And so that's why the Federal Reserve is so pissed, because they like to get their hands on your money, and these centralized banks want to use the SWIFT system, which can take days to transfer money. Whereas crypto, boom, it can transfer it just like that. So you're competing with their system, okay? And they don't like that. So in LCX AG versus 1.27 million US coin, and again, this goes back to the medieval deodand, which ultimately became part of English maritime admiralty law. This is a case where the United States just seizes someone's Bitcoin, and without a warrant, without any criminal charges, it's called civil asset forfeiture, which I believe is totally unconstitutional under American common law. And unfortunately, Trump, God bless his soul, has gone along with this to create a crypto treasury, a crypto sovereign wealth fund using seized cryptocurrency. The same way that police departments do when they pull someone over and they have a bunch of money. They call it a drug sniffing dog. Oh, we smell traces of drugs on the money and we're going to seize it. And good luck getting it back. You'll have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a lawyer to try to get your currency back. And if you lose, which you probably will, the police department will split that money with the federal government, and they'll use it to enrich their police department, get nice brand new shiny cruisers and a nice brand new police department and better salaries for their cops. So it's just something left over from English common law that needs to be abolished. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. Good seeing you, AI Viper. Gosh, I am really glad that you showed up today, bro. Right on. Guys, AI Viper is a really legit dude. And he's the guy who helped me create that bumper that I got one of my videos banned because it showed firearms on it. Because I guess on a live stream, you can't show firearms. So I can't do a bumper until I get one that doesn't show guns on it. So sorry about that, guys. But AI Viper is the guy who helped me, and he's a really good guy. I definitely invite you to like and subscribe to his channel and support him. Super good guy. So anyways, we talked a little bit about civil asset forfeiture, and this is an example of that in the LCX AG versus $1 million US, 1.274 million US dollar coin. All right. So in that case, a New York court authorized service of process via a non-fungible token on a blockchain wallet. So they literally authorized his wallet to be served with process. Can you believe that? And so that was a novel approach. And I believe that Edward Snowden used the blockchain to expose the illegal spying program that the federal government, I think under Bush and Obama, had been using against we the people. Illegal spying on the American people without a warrant. He used the blockchain to get his information out about that. So this is a precedent-setting case that demonstrates the court's adaptability to blockchain's unique features. So, and obviously the teaching point that I'm going to discuss with my students is how they can now use blockchain to serve people, which is really interesting, because how would you even know you got served process if your blockchain's in a cold storage wallet and you don't access it? You're never going to know, right? But the court's going to presume that it was served. So I think that's also unconstitutional, but that was a wrongly decided case in my opinion. So the next case, In Re Celsius Network LLC. In Re Celsius Network LLC, which is a 2022 case, this is a bankruptcy case. A bankruptcy court ordered the disclosure of customer names, rejecting anonymity claims to ensure transparency in the bankruptcy process. This decision highlights the conflict between crypto's emphasis on pseudo-anonymity, and bankruptcy law's transparency requirements. Now, the next one, just bear with me because I'm still sort of building this out. All right. Regulatory shifts under the Trump administration in 2025. This is when crypto really started blowing up, is with Trump. All right. So this is when my crypto went from like 10,000 up to 120,000 at the top. I think right now it's around 114, but that's pretty amazing, right? But unfortunately it's measured in fiat currency, which we all know is worthless notes of debt. So hopefully that'll change and we'll go back to a gold-based and silver-based currency system. And then it could be tied to that, which I think we can all agree would be more efficient and better for us. And we would stop having worthless notes of debt and we could get rid of interest rates altogether. How do you guys like that? All right. So the Trump administration's pro-crypto stance, which was announced in 2025, marks a shift from enforcement-driven regulations to fostering innovation. President Trump's executive order established the president's working group on digital asset markets, and it was tasked with creating a national crypto asset reserve and reviewing existing regulations. The appointment of Paul Atkins, a blockchain advocate, as SEC chairperson suggests a move towards clearer registration pathways, and reduced litigation. Well, that's a good thing. I'll tell you as a lawyer, I hate litigation. I want to settle everything. I don't want to put anything in front of a black robe taskmaster. Okay, guys, that's not something that we want to do as lawyers, at least guys like me. Now, the SEC's Reform Crypto Task Force, led by Commissioner Hester Pierce, aims to enhance disclosure frameworks and provide regulatory certainty. So let me just real quick, because I don't want to ignore you guys. Now, Pro Se America wants to talk about Vallejos versus Bonta. Well, that's a Second Amendment case that I think you have, or that you're at least somewhat tangentially sort of related to, but maybe at some point. I do need to cover some of the recent Second Amendment legislation that came down, guys, but today I want to focus on cryptocurrency. So let's see here. Cryptocurrency law is at a crossroads, with courts and regulators grappling to apply traditional legal frameworks to a decentralized, borderless technology. Cases like SEC v. Ripple and Coinbase highlight the challenges of defining digital assets under security law. The United States versus Harmon and IRS versus Coinbase cases underscore AML and tax enforcement complexities. Jurisdictional innovations, as seen in LCX-AG and In Re Celsius, reflect the court's adaptability to blockchain's unique features. As the Trump administration pushes for a pro-crypto regulatory environment, the legal landscape will continue to evolve. So and I talked about, is crypto a security? And that depends. It can be considered a security if it's based on a promise from someone, as opposed to just being on a blockchain that's decentralized. So that's always scary, right? Because if you get some government nut job, like a Peter Strzok or a Lisa Page, and they don't like Trump, they can throw a wrench in there for you. It's just too political with all these government agencies. I'm all for abolishing as many government agencies as possible, enforcing all these government succours to get real jobs and stop leeching off the taxpayers. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. Now, one of my students asked me, how can you say that the Federal Reserve is private? Well, because it is. And there's no constitutional provision that allows for a quasi-government, quasi-private organization to exist. This was created out of case law, unfortunately, much to Rami and Wassam Adayu's chagrin. So one of the ways that I was able to show that the Federal Reserve is private and they're not subject to President Trump, well, one of them is President Trump can't fire Powell. He can fire pretty much anyone else, but not the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So that tells you right there that it's private, more private in nature than it is public. But what's another way? Well, we know that the Federal Reserve Bank is all about DEI and affirmative action. In other words, putting someone in a position of power, not because they're qualified, but because of racial or genetic characteristics. That's all DEI really is. It's allowing someone to be put in a position of power who is less qualified because they might be a transgender, or they might be darker skinned, or they might be a woman, or they might be a man who pretends to be a woman. And that's what DEI essentially is. So what happened when President Trump issued his executive order to abolish this abomination called DEI under Executive Order 14151? Well, what happened is the Federal Reserve removed DEI stuff from their website, but they still are refusing to release their official position on DEI. And DEI is something that George Soros and the World Economic Forum desperately wants. And I think it's also called ESG, where BlackRock will refuse to loan you money or give your corporation a lower score if you refuse to hire a certain amount of this race or this they, them, or this, them, their in their company, because qualifications don't matter. What matters is what race are you, or how do you identify? Do you identify as a crayon? Oh, well, if this person identifies as a crayon, clearly that person should be the CEO of your company. So that's basically what's going on there. But the Federal Reserve to this day still refuses to acknowledge that they've eliminated DEI, and they don't have to. And that's another way you know that the Federal Reserve is a private organization, not subject to U.S. law, okay? Or very, 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 in a limited way subject to U.S. law. That means the executive doesn't even have authority over their chairman. That should tell you everything you need to know right there. And then I talk about the lawfulness of their DEI programs. Now, the party line is that the Federal Reserve operates as an independent entity with a structure distinct from other federal agencies, blending public and private elements. Well, we all know that's nonsense. You're either government or you're not. It's just like traffic tickets where they try to say they're quasi-criminal. That's ridiculous. And that's why I defeat traffic tickets in a very unique way, by finding the police officer and the city clerk in default. I handle them as civil cases under Penal Code Section 9, which in California, which we can get into in another show. So that pretty much is the show for today. I know it may have gone a little long. Now, there are some other organizations that they call quasi-private, quasi-public. Fannie Mae, the U.S. Postal Service, which is a joke. I mean, why do we have a postal service other than to help the Democrat Party? I mean, there's no reason for it to exist. It loses billions of dollars every year and has to be subsidized by the taxpayer. Amtrak is another one, a complete joke. I mean, it loses billions of dollars as well. Total joke. And then, of course, the federally funded Research and Development Center, and even NPR, right? They get billions, or they did, or millions at least, in taxpayer dollars. And it's an all Democrat run organization, which runs news articles that favor Democrats. I mean, how is that fair to people who don't support Democrats, right? Another reason why we just need to get rid of all these government agencies, because other people who don't support Marxism and far left policies, they have a right to be heard too, and not to be silenced and stifled by government employees who masquerade as private companies, right? Because they basically shill for the Marxist state, the federalist state. So that is pretty much, I talk about the non-delegation doctrine principle. Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution vests legislative power in Congress, limiting its power to delegate authority to other entities. And we've seen them doing that for years with our gun rights, right? Delegating stuff to the ATF, or the ATF, which means always think forfeiture, right? That's all the ATF wants to do is they want to take away your firearms permits, take your guns from you, because again, they're part of the federalist state that doesn't believe that private citizens should be able to keep and bear arms. They don't believe it. They absolutely do not believe it. And so even though that's what the Constitution mandates, that, and again, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights isn't authority granted to we the people. It's a recognition. The Bill of Rights is a small sample of pre-existing rights that existed long before the Constitution, that existed prior to the Magna Carta, that existed prior to the Confirmatio Confirmatum. It is a sampling of pre-existing rights that come from your creator, that cannot be taken away by man. And that's the problem with academia. They hear somebody like me and they automatically say, oh, he's one of these right-wing radical, homophobe, bigot, blah, blah, blah. That's what they say about anyone who they disagree with. They engage in character assassination. So anyways, it's just too much for me to cover in one show, but I hope that you guys got a better understanding of what's going on with the crypto laws. Hold on one second. I hope you guys got a better understanding of what's going on with crypto laws and crypto legislation and the new body of case law and cases of first impression that we're facing with decentralized currency. The Federalists are against cryptocurrency, including the Federal Reserve bankers. They absolutely do not like centralized, non-centralized currency systems. And so they're going to fight tooth and nail to not lower interest rates, even though they lowered interest rates for Joe Biden when they were at 9.5%. Why? Well, because him and Pocahontas were anti-crypto legislation, or strike that. They were anti-crypto. And so even though the inflation was at 9.5% under Sleepy Joe, they still lowered interest rates. But now they backtrack and say, well, interest rates are at 2.5% under Trump, but we're not going to lower them. And they come up with some gobbledygook. Now, 2 Federal Reserve boards of governors did finally say, no, we think we should lower interest rates. They should have been lowered, a long time ago. All right. And if they were, your cryptocurrency that's now valued at 114,000, if it's Bitcoin, in my estimation, would be probably around $500,000 per coin easily. And so that is the battle right now. And it's unfortunate that it's become a Democrat-Republican thing, because in reality, it's a federalist versus anti-federalist thing. And that's how we need to start thinking about it on my channel. And I make that mistake, unfortunately, myself, because that's really what it's all about. It's about one side who believes the government should control every aspect of your lives, and the anti-federalists who believe the government should stay out of your lives unless in very limited cases, for like regulating trade disputes or providing for border security to keep criminals from flooding across into our country and getting free stuff from the taxpayers, things like that. Very, very limited powers that were granted to the federal government. Washington, D.C., 10 miles square, guys. All right, so let's take a look here. Rami says that stablecoins achieve stability. by being pegged or tied to another asset. Unfortunately, as Rami says, typically a traditional fiat currency like the US dollar. Well, I think that Bitcoin being tied to gold or silver could be our way out of that, brother. And so I'm really, really hopeful that we can come up with a way without using, I think it's called COMEX, to do that. If there's got to be another way that we can tie our gold or silver, maybe by putting it into some kind of an escrow account or something through a bank, maybe a bank that's less regulated, that's designed to basically be a store of value or a storage facility for that gold or silver. That might be a way to do it. But I absolutely agree with you. Now, What's the Matter You says, exactly, Michael. So how do you imagine the founders would allow judges to alter or undermine those rights? That was my first clue. Oh, bro, we're totally aligned on that one, man. I think that judges, we shouldn't have that many judges, first of all. And that judges' powers have grown far too vast and powerful. And that judges, many have just become political activists. And unfortunately, because of modern academia, most judges lean to the left because our schools lean to the left. And academic institutions, the rainbow flag mafia who runs the academic institutions, lean hard left. And their political enforcers like Antifa lean hard left. And they're basically funded by communist China. And prior to that, they were funded by the KGB from the Soviet Union. So foreign invaders have infiltrated our school systems to such a large degree that it's time for you to start homeschooling your kids, guys. If you believe in economic freedom, in having power over your own currency, then you should join me in trying to form parallel systems where we homeschool our kids and we do business with one another the way that Adam Smith envisioned in his book, The Wealth of Nations, which I recommend that you all read Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith if you want to learn a little bit about the way that I think about these things and the way that most of our founding fathers who were anti-federalists thought about things. Now, let's see here if there's any other questions. And then Rami says, how is fiat toilet paper an asset? Well, I don't think that it's an asset at all. And it's unfortunate that we're tied to it. But right now, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, but it will be replaced by the BRICS system because the BRICS system makes sense. It's backed by gold and silver like our currency is supposed to be. So unless Donald Trump is successful in returning the United States to a tariff-based economy and abolishing the federal income tax and these government organizations that shill to the hard left and the Federalists, we're in a lot of trouble. And we know from one of the videos that I shared at the beginning of the show that Chairman Powell at the Federal Reserve has no desire to allow that to happen. We know that he shills for the Obama types and the big government types, and he does not want the Federal Reserve banks to be abolished because that's how he is enriched. That's how he is empowered by the fiat currency system. So it's going to be a situation where with help from people at BlackRock, the Federal Reserve is going to somehow gain control over your crypto, and then the Federal Reserve will co-opt crypto, and it will no longer be the store of value and the private exchange that it was intended to be. So what is the answer? I don't know. I think that gold and silver is a great investment. I think that holding as much gold and silver as you can is great. I think that if you have stocks because you're forced to invest in a Roth IRA or a SEP, that you can invest in gold-related ETFs. But again, that's tied to the fiat currency system. So I don't know how Trump is going to be able to do all this in less than 4 years, but who knows? Who knows? If we, the people, become educated in what the deep state and the fiat currency system has done to the American people, and we demand action, there may be a chance. But fighting the bankers and the people in the Middle East that control our banks is going to be very difficult. And so all I can tell you is creating parallel systems is the only solution that I can think of right now. Creating parallel systems, homeschooling your kids, growing your own food, homesteading, and doing business with like-minded people. And so that would be the only thing that I could say. And Rami says a tariff-based economy equates to fair trade and currency parity. Well, of course it does. But that's why, people in the economics classes, oh, tariffs are terrible. Oh my God, it's awful. Guys, prior to 1913, we didn't have an income tax. And America saw unprecedented wealth. Everybody could afford a house pretty much. So having an income tax, which basically just pays for debt service on fiat currency that's worthless, it's now a note of debt. You used to be able to trade in your dollar for gold. Now it's just a note of debt. It's worthless. It's valued based on its perceived value. The printing press that these banksters are able to create money out of nothing and then loan it back to you and get interest. Man alive. I mean, the Rothschild family is rolling in the money, guys, and it's definitely not any of us. So, and then AI Viper says that we need to get away from prime numbers for encryptions, and using parallel is paramount. Dude, I'm with you, bro. I think that's the way to go. So guys, I'm going to go and try and get some rest, get some chow, take the kids out for some food. I do appreciate you all joining me. Make sure to homeschool your kids, guys. That's the most important part of the lesson that I'm teaching today, is get your kids out of government schools. Teach them how to be critical thinkers. Critical thinking is not something you're born with. It's something that's developed by having good parents. Sure, some kids have higher IQs than others. Absolutely. But you can teach anyone critical thinking with just a lot of hard work and sweat equity and putting that into your kids. And when I hear people say, oh, well, it's too hard. I need a public school teacher to babysit my kids so I can work. Well, dude, guess what? You're in the wrong line of work. Your kids are what matter, not your job. Find another job. Figure out a way to make it happen. Be like a Marine. We can do so much with so little. We can do anything with nothing. Do or die. Stop making up excuses and take control over the minds of your children. And with that being said, guys, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to save, because we never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. Semper